Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today I'm hanging out with my friend Kat from thecreativeintrovert.com, and we're doing another Q&A session. Today, we're going to be talking about something that comes from all of you over the past year or so. Kat's been aggregating the questions that you have for me and then helping me just as a kind of interviewer to put the questions into a format that's easier for me to respond to. So thanks for doing this, Kat. I'm really thankful for your help.
You're welcome. And I'm really enjoying this. And this is a topic that I'm particularly fascinated by. And I think a lot of people are interested in this when they come to astrology. So we're looking at the idea of having a calling or a path, something in us that we feel destined to do. And I'm not just talking about general, just the events of our life, but something. It's hard to put into words, and I'm wondering if the word Dharma is appropriate for this.
Yeah, great question. The word Dharma, endless Dharma talks have been done about the nature of Dharma and so forth. So there's, I'm certainly not going to act like that I have some masterful, I'm not going to try to like straddle the topic like I've got this, but I can say the few things that I've understood through my gurus and teachers about Dharma and what I understand Indian astrologers to have thought about Dharma and how, like, sort of what the Western counterpart is and so forth. So Dharma is often translated as duty, but it has a variety of meanings. So it could mean that one has a sense of religious duty. For example, to tend to one's home altar, or to offer charity, or to be an active member in one's, religious or faith community. So there's some sense of piety to Dharma, like I'm doing some kind of sacred duty in the world or religiously or something like that. And Dharma can also mean what we are bound or obligated to do as a matter of duty. Like, I don't love to parent sometimes, but it's my duty. So Dharma has different, you can turn the jewel of the word and the meaning in different ways. The first house was related to Dharma by Indian astrologers, and I think the Western, that holds up in the Western tradition as well, where the first house or the ascendant has to do with one's Dharma. And when we think of Dharma, of course, in India, you're also getting into the caste system in part, where a person may be bound by the caste that they're born into. And of course, the yogic system, like the Bhagavad Gita and so forth, eventually there's a lot of figures, including the Buddha and so forth, that sort of denounce that element of Vedic culture. I'd say, like, no, that's, a person is not, it's not as simple as what, class you're born into. Your Dharma, what makes you you, and what gives you some kind of sacred duty in the world, is individual and not determined just by what family you're born into. So that's an evolution in thinking and in spiritual thinking that's central to yoga, Buddhism, etc., is that your Dharma is not just the constraints and duties and obligations that you have by virtue of the family that you're born into, or the society, or the moment in history, which sometimes people will use Dharma in that way. So I just want to distinguish that. Does that make sense so far, Kat?
Yeah, it does. And just to clarify, because you mentioned that the first house, at least in India, would be called Dharma, but in the West, we would call it something like, at least traditionally, like the Helm, or what would?
In the West, it's called the rising place. So the horoscopos, which is the hour marker, and it's the foundation of the nativity. It's connected with birth and the appearance of something that is the subject of the oracle, the inquiry to the oracle. So what is appearing is the baby, and the baby is coming out of the womb and into the light of the world. And the parents hold it up to the stars and say, "What do you have to say?" And the diviner says, "This is the subject of the divination." And so in that sense, what is essential to this being? What are they bound by? What sacred threads are tying their life together and giving it some sense of obligation or duty to do something in the world? That could be very mundane, and it could be spiritual. So, but that's that's basically the same description that we get in the West. Now, it's called the Helm in the West as well, which has to do with the steering wheel, but it's the steering wheel implies that, this is the personal place in the chart where the soul, which has agency and free will. I mean, the karma in our chart isn't just, a bunch of dice cast for us randomly. It's specifically determined by previous choices, momentum, associations, etc., that the soul has, that were freely chosen. So, and we continue to freely choose things. So in that respect, the individual represented by the first house has the wheel of the ship. And that's what the ancient Western meaning was. So then, in India, the idea of Dharma is it could have the connotation of what you're born into by caste or by class or by family or something like that you're obligated or bound to in some ways. And it could have that in the West as well. And in some ways in life, we are. Even in modern day where we don't have any like quote unquote caste system here, there still is something like a caste system here, depending on what group of people you're born into, the skin color, the gender versus sex that you're born with or that is assigned to you or whatever. So there's all sorts of things like that we're bound by or obligated to. And then there's this deeper sort of holy sense of what is essential to my nature and how do I enact that in the world as a kind of divine offering or as a way of contributing to the world in which I live positively.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. It makes me think of the word direction. And I think you did say that, like a sense of direction, because all of those meanings feels like, even with the idea of the rising place, like something is appearing. It doesn't just stay like that. You don't just stay as this baby. There's a direction that continues from then on, and that was preceded it as well.
Yes.
So I think something that I've struggled with is the difference between like karma, like and Dharma. So this idea, because you've kind of spoken about the inevitability of maybe both of these things, but I'm wondering so I have this image, and maybe this is again completely wrong, but the idea that there could be this field of karma, like literally a field, but through it there's a path, and that's the path of Dharma.
Yeah, that's a nice picture. Like Heraclitus, if I remember correctly, it was Heraclitus who said that character is fate. So, there's a plot line in life of the story and things that are going to unfold, and there's environmental conditions that are the environmental conditioning factors. And then there's a character. The soul is not the character, right? The character is a mirror of what the soul has been doing or is currently doing. And we have to start thinking about what the soul is doing or has been doing in terms of eons, not just like the past year or even this lifetime. So the character that we're born into is not who the soul is, it's what the soul is bound to experience as the result of its interests and proclivities in the material universe. So the soul mirrors, the character that we are born into mirrors that. So the character is still an element of karma. There's no real separation, because it's sort of like saying your body, your psychology, as well as the mother you're born with, as well as the broken arm you'll have at 18 playing football, that's what happened to me, as well as whatever, all different kinds of things that feel external to us, right? All of those are still elements of karma, because the soul is no more its body or its psychology or character than it is its environment or the plot line or the things that happen in and through any of it. So character is an aspect of destiny, and the soul is revealed in and through the character insofar as the character becomes reflective upon the soul. So when a person sits down and meditates, the character is starting to reflect upon the soul. And the idea is that rather than the character leading the plot line forward, and the soul is, in a sense, and therefore choosing things more unconsciously. It's a sign. When the character is dragging the soul along, it means that the soul is somewhat unconscious or unawake. Yeah. But when the character starts to purposefully reflect upon the soul, that's a sign that the soul is starting to awaken to its own nature. And that kind of character will then receive more agency, because it's a sign that the soul, the light is going on inside. And so then character becomes the means by which a person, the most personal, intimate connection to the soul and to the process of awakening the soul. Because at any point, the character can say, who am I? Why am I here? Why do I act or behave or think this way? Anytime that the character does that, it's the most immediate, intimate, personal means by which to awaken the soul. So the most personal level at which we receive the impetus from the environment to become reflective in that manner is through our character. So through our faults, through our flaws, through the things that we do good or not so good. That's the most immediate psychological level of feedback that we get that can start awakening the soul, because the character says, oh, you know what, like I'm a kind person, or maybe I have a short temper, or we encounter things out in the world that it's always feeding back to us in a really personal manner. And if we start reflecting upon our character because of the feedback we're getting all the time, then the character becomes the most immediate route back to the soul. And that's why Dharma is in a sense, that's why Dharma is the most personal ingredient of our birth charts. It's the most intimate means by which we can accomplish what any of us are actually here to do, which is to awaken spiritually.
And this is maybe too simple a summary, but like the soul wants us to be like going with the grain of our Dharma, basically. And it's up to the character to kind of heed that call.
Yeah, it's tricky because the character is a reflection of what the soul is doing, right? And so, but you have to imagine that the soul is sleepwalking.
Okay.
Right. So the soul is sort of sleepwalking through the material universe, and how does it come to recognize? What is the soul looking for as it's sleepwalking? You have to start there. And the idea that the ancient seers, rishis, sages had is that it's searching for love. But love is complicated because love is truth, beauty, goodness, justice, all rolled into one. So it's looking for bliss. It's looking for eternality. It's learning for happiness, truth, all of these things at one. And it's looking for that. And it wants to come to rest in those qualities, somehow yoked to them, joined to them, which is where we get the idea of the word yoga, to join or yoke, as well as the word religion, which is religio, to reconnect something that's been broken. So the soul is looking for that. But it's said to be looking for that in a realm where its basic experience is of, considering itself to somehow be apart from or separate. So we think, in order to find my material happiness, the only place I'm looking for, it's a solo mission, right? It's just like me looking for something to satisfy me. And I'm looking for it in material things that are always falling apart. They're transient. So the character that I come in with is a reflection of the type of things that I've been looking for to satisfy that hunger. And therefore, the character becomes the most immediate space of feedback that can help me see whether or not I'm happy, whether or not I've achieved what I'm looking for, and whether or not anything that I'm looking for can actually be found here or not. So the sign of good character development is where we're following the path of our character, which we're bound to, and we start saying, who am I? What is my divine origin? What is divine happiness? And how can I serve others because I'm starting to see them all as divine, looking for the same thing, but maybe struggling to find it like I was.
That's amazing. I hadn't really thought about the idea of the soul like looking to the character to learn. I was kind of just thinking about the character being like, soul, tell me what to do. But that's a different way of saying it. And one question that kind of I can't help but come up with is, why can't we just shortcut it? Like, isn't there a way, or like are some people at more of an advantage to kind of shortcut this direct line to bliss, union, love? And maybe that's me being like, well, fuck it. Like, maybe I'm just going to leave my home and join an ashram. Like, what's to stop us all from just figuring it out? And why would we have to go through all of this stuff? Basically.
Yeah, I know that's a really great question. I mean, so there is the temptation to shortcut it. Isn't there some way that I can bypass this because it's a painful, slow process, right? That's what it feels like anyway. But actually, from the space of being in eternal, like in it, we don't have an accurate understanding of time from within the body that we're in currently. Like our understanding of time is conditioned highly. If we understand that we're eternal spiritual beings, then we understand that like we're, this world, which is like a dream in some ways. Plato said, "Time is the moving image of eternity." So time is a kind of serviceable illusion, right? And we're so at any point when we start to wake up, what we notice is that we can't remember how long we've been asleep, and it doesn't matter. And awakening suddenly feels very fast. It's like when you wake up in the morning. When you wake up in the morning, it's like, God, I've been asleep for a long time and now I'm really awake. And you can't, it's not as though the awakening feels fast, natural, and sudden. And you're like, oh, I've always been awake. And I guess I was just asleep for a little while. I can't really say how long. I don't really have a cognitive experience of how long I've been asleep. So it's very important to recognize that as soon as you're having any of these thoughts or reflecting upon these questions and conundrums, it's already evidence that you're waking up, and that process is infinitely faster than the amount of time you've already been asleep.
Right.
Just like in the morning when you're waking up, it's like that process of going from sleeping to waking is infinitely faster than the amount of time you just spent asleep. You know what I mean?
And there often, not always, but there might be a sense of urgency then to be like, well, I need to get on with my day and get some things done, like achieve my goal in that day. And I guess with that waking up comes a sense of what your actual goal is. And it becomes hard to talk about Dharma without talking about that goal. Yeah,
exactly. You have to, yes, once the awakening process begins, the feeling of the duty of the Dharma being something more than just the things that I'm bound by my birth, the sense of it becoming sacred and pious, that I'm bound or obligated to continue the awakening process. That's what we mean by a spiritual calling. And it really has nothing to do with like, I'm going to really go out and achieve the thing that I was meant to achieve in the world. Like when people start talking about it the way, that's not Dharma. They're like, yes, I know that there's greatness inside of me and I've just got to go prove it. Not it. Yeah. What we're usually talking about is there is a sense that there's an awakening happening within me, and my character in this lifetime is in service to that. I know that this character is going to fade into oblivion after I die, and another character will emerge that will be continued modification of this process that I'm on. And I'm in service to that process. That's the eternal Dharma of yoga. So, when that starts to emerge, it's also important that we not try to rush it. Think about it like this. I think that spiritual life in bhakti is essentially feminine in nature. And I'm using it's not a perfect analogy, but when I think about how someone who is more inclined toward the yin, whether we're talking about a heterosexual dynamic or any other kind of dynamic, it's just to say in dynamics in relationships, there tends to be a pursuer and one who is being pursued, like a lover and a beloved. I generally think of, like, especially when I think back to like how I pursued girls as like a stupid 18-year-old guy or whatever, that there was like, let me just skip to the part where we make out like as quickly as possible. And the thing is that we have to trust that the feminine's understanding and version of how that is going to be most enjoyable, most satisfactory, most long-lasting, most productive is more reliable than our impulse to get there right away. As the feminine says, let's get to know each other. Let's build intimacy. Let's build trust. Let's develop this slowly. I promise you, slower will feel better. You know what I mean? So that's how I think about, and in bhakti, that's what we say too, that this isn't a truth that's an objective that we're getting to. That's in us, that's the ego thinking that it's the one that's getting there. It's not, it's just stewarding. It's ferrying the soul toward that direction. The soul is actually the one that's going in that direction. We don't even know, and we can't even see the soul yet. The character, we're like, oh, I know it's there, but I don't know what it looks like. I can feel it sort of, but I know that these are the path. This is the path that's been laid out before me. This is how I tend to that awakening, and I have to trust that the intimacy that I'm cultivating with the soul and with the soul of the soul, which is God, that will reveal itself in time to me if I care to this with tenderness, no rush. So there's a great prayer that was said by one of the saints in the Bhakti Yoga tradition, which was like, give me, even if I stay here in the material universe, body after body forever, I don't care. Just keep putting me in bodies where I remember to serve you. And it's that kind of selflessness that we're not in a rush, we're not in a hurry. We understand that the space and time of the universe is infinite, that there's no threat to our being, that we're eternal. We trust those truths, we put our faith in them, and then we selflessly serve our spiritual process of awakening. In the quiet, especially, the soul starts to come out and says, "Oh, you're trustworthy. I'll make out with you." So that's yeah, right. That's how I think it's best to hold that idea. The south node of the moon, for example, in ancient astrology and Indian astrology especially, will represent that impulse that says, "I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here." Right? Like, this is I see it's an illusion, or I'm in a dream. How do I get out? But the south node of the moon tends to represent the impulse toward that is still impatient and in some ways self-serving. So the south node of the moon is like, whereas Rahu, the north node of the moon, will be opposite. It will be more about the hunger that propels us to do things in the world and think that by maneuvering the Lego blocks of the material energy that somehow we'll get that satisfaction we're looking for. And what we ultimately and remember, these are the nodes of the moon, so the moon is the emblem of the material energy, the dream that we're in. And the way to address the temptation to leave is not by running off to an ashram. Typically, for most people, that's not it. There's going to be it's just like stopping eating isn't going to be the best way to lose weight. So there's going to be some kind of middle path. And of course, the Buddha talked about the middle path. Bhakti Yoga, we talk about the middle path, where we're sanctifying the substance that we're born into. And that's also what Dharma means. In which case, the north node of the moon, the ambitions that we have in the world, the best way to utilize those is to say, how can what I'm doing in the world be in service to the awakening of other spiritual beings?
Yeah, I like that you mentioned the nodes of the moon, because just remembering that we are talking about astrology, which I've almost forgotten. But just like, yeah, they represent these two different ways of almost like responding to the idea of Dharma, which I think is interesting. But yeah, something that's really helped me with all of this is just, and maybe this isn't grounded in reality, but the idea that there is a grand plot line that I don't understand, that maybe God figured out this would be the best thing for me, or the best ultimate way back to God would be this plot line. And I guess it's easier when you start realizing, like, if you just reflect on your own life, like for you, it's, how did you, move through all of these different stories and lives to come to this point now where you're initiated in the Bhakti tradition, and like all of these things that have happened. You couldn't have scripted that yourself, for one.
Yeah.
And yeah, for me, it's somebody who's like quite, like, I guess quite 10th house oriented, and just being like, well, my calling must have something to do with my career and, my public appearance in the world. Mm-hmm. And realizing that there's more to this plot line than that has been very helpful. And like kind of disorienting as well.
Yeah, it is totally. Because this is where we get down. I mean, that impulse where it's like, well, maybe I should just go to an ashram, and why isn't everyone just go to an ashram? So it's specifically because, the world is, first of all, this world is facilitated not because there's anything evil about us or the impulse to explore what it means to be apart from or separate from our source. It's facilitated specifically because God loves us. So here's a garden to play in where you can experience what it's like to be separate. And I'm going to tell you right now that at every turn along the way, I'll ask you, do you really want to be here? Because it turns out that not being together, the two of us, is pretty painful. But every step of the way, God is sort of organizing the karma of our lives to continually invite us back to that self-reflection. So it's always there for us, and there's infinite patience. In fact, this universe itself was said to be anadi, which means without beginning, originless. So there's a sense in which the universe expands out of Vishnu, and then it contracts back into Vishnu, and expands and contracts. And souls can be here absolutely as long as they want. There is no judgment, and we can leave whenever we want, and that is always being invited. The other thing I wanted to say was just that but the impetus to spiritual life, one of the things that there's an image in Bhakti Yoga that we use, my guru often uses, which is like a needle. And if you imagine like a rose, let's say you have oftentimes they're making garlands. You put needles through the rose petals and string through. And there might be 100 roses all pushed together. The needle goes through all 100 instantly, right? But it still has to go through every single layer, right? So from the standpoint of our souls, it feels as though, sometimes it feels like we're going through one petal at a time, right? But again, the important thing to keep in mind is that this process of awakening, from the standpoint of how long we've been here asleep, and the eternal nature of the soul, it happens very quickly once the soul starts inquiring about its own nature.
And there's like a necessity to it all, I guess.
Yeah, the other thing that we say in modern astrology a lot is that, like, well, I chose this path. Well, my soul chose this path. And in ancient astrology, it's a little bit different. Your soul it's a part of a selection process that's mirrored, for example, in like the myth of Plato's myth of Ur. But Indian astrology has a slightly different picture. It's like, yeah, your free will choices are a part of this, but imagine that you're a parent and your child has made a decision. You're trying to bring them along. And I don't want to say that God is only a parent, because in Bhakti, we say that God actually has all these different dimensions: friend, lover, warrior that we might battle with. Like there's a lot of different ways we can relate to God. It's not just like a parent in the sky. But let's just use a parent analogy for a second and say that if a child does something and you're trying to bring them along in life, you have to be really creative with how you reward or punish them, or you have to be very creative with how you respond basically to what they're doing. And the point is that our destiny is partly what we've chosen, and it's also set up for us based on how God is responding to how we've chosen. And it's really difficult to assess that in some kind of objective way. If you try to throw objective reasoning at that, it doesn't work very well. That's why faith is a requirement. You start to understand the response of God in the fabric of your life when you adopt a mood of meditation or prayer or mindfulness or self-reflection, as well as some degree of surrender and faith that the fabric of your life and the way that things happen is an interaction between yourself and the divine.
Yeah, it's I really like this idea of there being these like nudges along the way, and it's just being like, hey, if you just go that way and you'll get back on the path and you'll get home, and trust me, it's what you want. And then, sometimes we go with it and sometimes we fight against it. And it is really interesting to reflect on all of these different ways that people have come up with for trying to figure that out. So I love the myth of and I love the idea of the daimon. And this idea of there is this thing in us that could be also like nudging us.
So just really quick, have you read this book, Kat?
I have. I love it. And a lot of my ideas and questions have come from it. Yeah.
So this book we're talking about is called The Soul's Code: In Search of Character and Calling by James Hillman. And I think if you've enjoyed this talk, if you didn't space out after me chatting on and on for 15 minutes or whatever, then we're probably at like 30 or 40 now. But read this book, The Soul's Code, because it really gets into all that we've talked about today from maybe a little bit more of the kind of the Greek tradition, but it's really, really great.
This idea that there's an oak tree inside all of the acorns. It's really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I can see how people are kind of questioning. For example, I've heard a lot of people say things like, you know, whenever I see 1111 or have a deja vu, then I know that I'm like doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Which is a really, again, it's like there are these sweet ideas that we have, and I don't know how true they actually are, but
well, when everybody in the world thinks that 1111 is a special secret message, it's not so secret anymore. Maybe not so special anymore. But
it's like, no, but I really see it a lot. It's like, do you just happen to like be bored at 11 a.m. every day?
No. I'm teasing. No, there's like I think that there's so many different ways in which the universe speaks. The other thing is to make sure that we're not paranoid about it. I mean, that's actually my real beef with the number thing, is that it's you know, if we cultivate a daily spiritual, reflective, prayerful mood and practice in our lives, we will notice that it's not nearly as sensational and, oh my God, I saw this number, and oh my God, this thing stood out, and I know that that's my thing, and blah, blah, blah. Because the feeling then is that it's almost like the universe is conspiring to give us signs. And I find that that's not so personal. And so it can be. I'm not trying to be too prescriptive here, but I think that when we develop a daily mindfulness practice of any kind, where we stop to listen to God within, that the voice becomes really present and soft and gentle and really easy to hear. And it doesn't require lots of, you know, magical numbers or synchronicities and all of that. It can, but it doesn't necessarily need that anymore.
Yeah, it doesn't need it. And I mean, I was wondering how much of this idea of the path sits outside the chart, like our birth chart, and how much can we actually use astrology as a tool to help us kind of pay attention to those nudges, maybe.
I think if you reflect upon astrology regularly, it becomes one of the most amazing ways that the divine, and there's either in the yogic tradition, we say that there are two birds sitting on a branch inside. There's the soul and there's the super soul, which is to say there's your individual soul complete unto itself. And then there's the super soul, which is the source of all souls. And that super soul and the soul are like two birds sitting on a branch. And we're always trying to, you know, we can get messages from the soul speaking to us, which is basically just your own self shining through the web of maybe more unconscious behavior or patterning. And then you can also hear the soul of your soul speaking, which tends to have more of that sense of giving you higher guidance that you don't feel that you had already, that comes through grace or comes through some revelation.
Yeah. I was kind of like thinking that it's helpful to see how things play out in our chart, because that way, again, that there just feels like there is a general plan for us, and that doesn't need to be a bad thing. We don't need to fight against it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. In the chart, if you track the chart and watch what's happening in the chart, you'll find that the soul will speak, and you'll find also that divine guidance of how to manage what's there will come through as well.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that's all I've got, or that's maybe all I should be asking on this massive subject.
Thank you for being here and helping me to field questions from all of you. And we'll be back together again soon for another round of questions. We probably have more videos that we'll do soon, right?
Yeah, for sure. And keep sending those questions in as well.
Yeah, info@nightlightastrology.com. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.